Between April and June 2017, officers in Lumberton, North Carolina, would discover the naked bodies of 3 women, only a few blocks from one another. One had been placed inside a trash can, another tucked inside a cabinet of an abandoned house, and the third stuck in between some bushes by the railroad tracks. A whisper of a serial killer in town targeting prostitutes and drug users hit the streets and the news. These marginalized victims were only a few of the missing and murdered Indigenous women whose homicides have yet to be solved. Their deaths would expose a pattern of historical racism, internal corruption, and neglectful incompetence exhibited by local law enforcement. Who were these poor women being murdered in their neighborhoods, and will the monsters who brutally ended their lives ever face justice? Hello, and welcome to Shades of Murder. I am your host, Alita Caldwell. In this podcast, I discuss tales of homicide from around the world and throughout history, attempting to unravel the layers of darkness that help make humans into monsters. Please be forewarned that each episode contains specific and at times very graphic and disturbing details of the case. The show is not intended for all audiences, and listener discretion is strongly advised. Indigenous women and girls on some reservations are reported to have been murdered 10 times more than the national average. It is widely known that the real number of missing and murdered Indigenous persons is grossly underreported. One of the reasons this occurs is because they are racially misidentified or their tribes are not federally recognized. Statistics have shown that law enforcement officers regularly mislabel Indigenous persons as being Hispanic or Black. One study conducted revealed that 13% of law enforcement agencies don't even include Native American as a racial or ethnic identifier. For the Lumbee tribe in North Carolina, this is the case. Since they are not a federally recognized tribe, not only do they lack the federal resources and rights given to other Indigenous persons, but when they are victims of violence, they are not placed within the federal database, and many studies do not include state-only recognized tribes. Since the Lumbee don't qualify for grants and other beneficial programs, they lack the resources to effectively communicate this crisis, much less allocate the resources to help combat it. The denial of federal recognition stands to minimize the identity of tribes in an attempt to erase their Indigenous heritage and fuels racial misidentification. As of 2024, the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, also known as NamUs, identified only 4 cases within the Lumbee tribe, and the FBI showed none. The absence of cultural education and recognition, combined with an abnormally high occurrence of violent crime in the region, has led to an environment where many of these murders are hardly investigated, much less solved. Robeson County, North Carolina is 42% Native American. Since 2008, there have been 285 deaths, and more than half of the victims investigated have been Indigenous. According to statistics gathered by the MMI Coalition of North Carolina, more than 600 women and girls have gone missing or murdered. Most of us are already aware that due to everything from racial misidentification to never being reported or properly investigated, in addition to a lack of comprehensive and accurate data, the true number is likely much, much higher. On paper, it looks as if this crisis in Robeson County, North Carolina barely exists, but the truth hidden behind this missing data and the subsequent behavior of the Sheriff's Department is much darker. Within this region of North Carolina is the Lumbee tribe, also known as the People of the Dark Waters. It is the largest tribe east of the Mississippi River, with around 55,000 members. Before 1715, the Lumbee tribe stretched all the way up to Virginia and down into South Carolina, encompassing a mass area of 44,000 square miles. The Lumbee tribe was born of the survivors of over a dozen tribal nations, from the Algonquian, Iroquoian, and Siouan language families, including the Hatteras, the Tuscarora, and the Chippewa. The state of North Carolina recognized the Lumbee ancestors as Indians in 1885. In 1953, this collective tribe decided to name themselves Lumbee in a sign of strength and unity. They were recognized as a tribe by Congress in 1956 under the Lumbee Act. However, they were not fully acknowledged as being a federal tribe, which denied them many of the critical benefits of being recognized. Specifically, when a tribe is given federal recognition, this grants them certain autonomy, land protection, and access to important federal programs and sources, like healthcare. As a result, the people of the Lumbee tribe have long been faced with different kinds of challenges and adversity. The majority of the Lumbee tribe reside in Robeson County and the surrounding areas of Fayetteville, North Carolina, which is well known for the location of Fort Bragg Army Base. The landscape of Robeson County is very diverse and unique, surrounded by agriculturally rich farmlands, pale sandy soil, and pine trees decorating its path everywhere you look. Also characterized by its low swamplands and the Lumbee River, it provided many people with protection and sanctuary, offering an abundance of food including fish, game, and plants, in addition to safety during times of war and hardship. Robeson County is one of the most racially diverse in the United States. 42% of its residents are Native American, 31% are white, 24% are black, and 9% are Hispanic. Robeson County is faced with extremely high poverty. Statistics show that more than 30% of the community lives below the poverty line, which is more than 2 times the state average. Similar to many areas that struggle with poverty, there is a significantly higher rate of crime, in particular, violent crime. Crime rates across the United States show that it has the highest rate in the entire state of North Carolina, with violent crime inflicting 920 persons per 100,000. For perspective, the national average is 363.8 cases per 100,000. In the town of Lumberton, a small rural town with approximately 22,000 residents, the likelihood of becoming a victim of sexual violence and homicide is terrifying. As of 2016, crime data showed the chances of being assaulted, raped, or murdered are 1 in 55. It is by far the most dangerous city to call home in North Carolina. This small southern town, riddled with violent crime, faces an ever-growing crisis. The most vulnerable to becoming victims of rape and homicide are Native American women and girls. And like the rest of the country's missing and murdered Indigenous persons, their cases are not being prioritized. A pattern of long-going corruption, racism, incompetence, and negligence has helped to perpetuate these violent attacks on girls and women, the majority of whose families are yet to be given any semblance of justice. On Saturday, March 29, 2003, Michelle Ann Driggers, a 23-year-old woman from Maxton, North Carolina, never returned home. Only 8 hours after she was last seen, her body was discovered lying face down in a puddle of mud on a driveway of an overgrown cemetery. She was severely beaten, and her clothes were strewn around her nude body. Her remains were sent to the office of the Chief Medical Examiner in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Autopsy results later proved that she had been struck in the head with a blunt object. The young woman had been a victim of strangulation, multiple stab wounds, and she had been sexually assaulted with a sharp object. All 3 were believed to have played a role in her cause of death. However, there was never any official results from the autopsy, nor was an exact cause of death established. The area where Michelle and Driggers' remains were found was commonly known as an area for prostitution. Reporters were quick to reveal that in September 2002, she had been charged with soliciting a crime against nature. This means that it was a sexual act other than sexual intercourse, but the charges were dropped. Unfortunately, that became the main focus of her murder, although no one claimed she had been actively involved in sex work. It was merely a rumor since she had been charged with the solicitation. Michelle had been a waitress at several different local restaurants, but at the time of her death she had been unemployed. Yet all of the newspapers referred to her as being a prostitute, which only served to marginalize her further and demean the importance of her death. To her grieving father, he didn't know whether the rumors were true, or if they had anything at all to do with her murder. To him, it didn't make any difference. He had lost his little girl. His 3 grandchildren no longer had their mom. Her father, Jimmy Driggers, became very frustrated with the case not going anywhere, and after almost 6 years, he put it upon himself to offer up a $500 reward for information leading to an arrest in the case, stating, "I just think this case isn't coming along fast enough. Whatever she's done, she didn't deserve to be beaten to death. I just want to try to speed up the process and find the person who brutally killed my daughter." Only 3 months later, another woman, 36-year-old Lisa Hardin, was discovered under eerily similar circumstances. On July 12th, her partially clothed and bruised, beaten body was found behind a warehouse in the woods. Although Lisa had not been stabbed like Michelle had, the woman had been struck with a blunt force object. Whether she had been sexually assaulted like Michelle was never revealed. Autopsy results were never released, nor an official cause of death established, but it was believed she had died from strangulation. It was reported that during this time, whenever a woman was arrested for prostitution, her name and address would be published in the newspaper. I don't understand how this can be legal under any circumstances, but given the nature of these sexually related crimes and the murders of these young women, it may have directly led to more of these marginalized women being killed. Lisa Marie Hohman of Maxton, North Carolina, which is near Lumberton, was a troubled young girl who couldn't wait until she left home, or that is what authorities were told. She had expressed to her mom that she had been having trouble at school, but didn't want to talk about what was bothering her, so her mom didn't push the issue. On the night of May 31st, 2005, Lisa Marie Hohman did just that. When her mother left around midnight to take her boyfriend and nephew back to their place, Lisa had chosen to stay home. Her mother, Samantha Locklear, was not gone more than 10 minutes, and when she returned, her daughter was missing. Samantha Locklear, along with her brother, went out looking for her the very next morning, driving all around Robeson County looking for her daughter. The following day, she filed a missing persons report with the sheriff's department. As we have heard countless times in these cases, the police didn't take the mother's concern seriously, telling her that she was likely staying with friends. Detective Chance was assigned her case. He interviewed Lisa's boyfriend, her friends, and searched a few homes in both Lumberton and Maxton. According to some of Lisa's friends, she had told them that she had planned on running away from home once she turned 16. Lisa disappeared 3 days before her 16th birthday. Her mother went all around Robeson County, hanging hundreds of flyers with her daughter Lisa's face on them. 3 years passed, and not a word from Lisa. It appears as if the officer simply took the word of her underage friends and believed she had run away. Although she was classified as an endangered runaway, no one seemed to care that much to find her. Then on New Year's Day 2008, a group of men, which included her mother's fiancé and 2 others, discovered a young woman's remains near her mother's home. The young woman was later identified as Lisa Marie Hohman. There was no official cause of death. The only information stated by the coroner is that she had likely died from external forces. There were never any suspects identified. On Saturday, March 30th, 2013, a mother reported that her daughter had disappeared. She was a 23-year-old mother of 3 small children. Early that next morning, on Easter Sunday, a man was walking along Holly Swamp Church Road in Lumberton, North Carolina, looking for a relative of his who had recently gone missing. As he neared the canal, he was shocked to discover what appeared to be a deceased woman face down in the water. He immediately contacted the police. The Robeson County Sheriff's Department stated that the woman had been shot to death 3 times. She was identified as 23-year-old Lauren Holmes. She was not the relative whom the man who found her had been looking for. It is unknown whether this individual was ever found. The police never came to tell Lauren Holmes' family that she was dead. They found out about her murder that night on the news, forever traumatizing her mother and her small children. It had been reported by her mother that she had gone out to meet a friend that night prior, but then she never came back. Her body was found less than 2 miles from her home. Police officers interviewed the friend she had been out with the previous night. According to one of her male friends, he had dropped her off at her residence around 5 a.m. that morning, but didn't watch her go inside the house. However, Lauren's personal items were later located inside this man's car, including her purse, keys, and cell phone. He apparently went back to her residence that following day to return these items. Earlier in the evening, Lauren Holmes had vanished. Someone had fired bullets into her mother's house. Her 3 children were thankfully unharmed, but her mother was shot in the arm. It is believed that police figured that her death was directly connected to her mother's house being shot at. However, there is no indication that Lauren was involved in anything that could have warranted such violence being directed at her or her mother. She was not known to be involved with drugs or engaging in anything nefarious. Officers haven't taken any additional action on her case, and as of today, it remains cold. Why they did not look further into this suspicious friend of hers is unknown. Why would they just accept his version of events? Makes no sense when her personal items were left behind in his vehicle. Lauren Holmes was described as being a bubbly and warm young woman who took great care of her family. Her brutal murder deserves to be solved. Around 4:30 a.m. on November 16th, 2016, a sheriff's deputy was startled to hear someone pounding at his front door. When he opened it, the man was shocked at the sight before him. It was a young woman, coated in blood. She had cuts all over her body. The woman told him that her house was on fire before she collapsed and died. The deputy contacted emergency services and the young woman was taken to the nearest hospital. She was identified as 18-year-old Marcey Elizabeth Blanks of Lumberton. An autopsy would reveal that she had been raped and stabbed 89 times by her perpetrator. There was very little reported about the case in the media, and there is little known about the investigation, but very quickly, the police made an arrest. Apparently, when this brave, amazing young woman found the strength to knock on the sheriff deputy's door, she told him who had attacked her and who had set her parents' house on fire. These were her last dying words. It is beyond me how she walked over to her neighbor's home so that justice could be found. The following day, 22-year-old Edward Autry Wright, who was a neighbor of Marcey Blanks, was arrested and charged in relation to her murder. He faced charges of first-degree burglary, first-degree arson, rape, and first-degree murder. Wright also exhibited additional signs of psychotic behavior when he bit an investigator while they were fingerprinting him at the station. That added an additional charge of assault on a law enforcement officer. Rudd is faced with capital murder charges since this was a homicide committed in the commission of another felony, burglary, in addition to the aggravated criminal factors of rape and arson. Even though he was named by his victim and charged, he has yet to go to trial. I can't locate much information as to why there has been such a holdup, except that since North Carolina is a death penalty state, and the prosecution will be seeking it, he was assigned 2 defense attorneys. There have been multiple motions that have pushed back the date of his trial. It has been 8 going on 9 years since this monster assaulted and brutally murdered this young woman, attempting to trap her inside a burning house. It was mentioned in the Red Justice Project podcast how Marcey's mother visits her daughter's gravesite every single day because she doesn't want her to ever feel like she's been abandoned. Marcey and her family are still waiting for justice. These tragic and heart-wrenching cases would only be the beginning of the horror and injustice the Lumbee women of Robeson County would face, whose brutal, senseless murders have yet to be solved. On April 18, 2017, neighbors on East 5th Street in Lumberton reported a foul odor penetrating the area. When officers arrived on the scene, they noticed something peculiar near a trash can placed outside an abandoned house. When they got closer, they were struck with horror at the sight. It was a leg sticking out from under a lid, a human leg. When officers opened the trash can lid, they discovered a woman placed upside down inside. The victim's body was nude and already in a state of advanced decomposition. The woman's body was partially scattered with trash. Her nose had been fractured, and there were cuts, which appeared to be from a fingernail, on her face and on her back. She was later identified as 36-year-old Rhonda Jones, a mother of 5 children. That same day, within a few blocks of where the body of Rhonda Jones was found, the police made another gruesome discovery. 32-year-old Kristin Bennett was located inside an abandoned house on Peachtree Street. Her nude body was covered in a gray blanket and placed inside a television cabinet. Although she was not an Indigenous woman, she had many close friends who were Lumbee, and she was an important part of their community. 2 days after the murders of these women occurred, Lumberton Police Chief Michael McNeil made this statement to the press, and I quote, "The bodies, both in advanced states of decomposition, were discovered April 18th in an area targeted by police as a known hangout for prostitutes and drug users." His statement immediately established the belief that these women were drug addicts and or sex workers, which damaged their image in the media and minimized their importance, leading to people, especially outside their community, to not be invested in what happened to them. It wouldn't be until a non-Indigenous, middle-class woman went missing in the same area of Lumberton that the FBI at last agreed to become involved in this case. While being interviewed by Nate Rogers, a reporter at CBS North Carolina, one of Rhonda's neighbors and friends, Megan Oxendine, spoke about how she just didn't understand how someone could harm her. And I quote, "I ain't never seen her act out or nothing. She's just quiet. She didn't really mess with too many people. I don't understand how somebody could do somebody's child, mother, niece like that." In the video, Megan Oxendine can be seen with her arms crossed, and when she talks, she doesn't look into the camera, but rather she gazes off in the distance. It wasn't something to notice at the time while she was interviewed, but she was wearing a black backpack. Eerily, this same black backpack would be located inside a trash can only 6 weeks later. Late on the evening of June 2nd, 2017, Megan Oxendine left her home where she lived with her boyfriend and another friend to buy some drugs. She went to an abandoned house that was frequented by drug dealers and users. Normally, according to her boyfriend, Megan would have returned shortly after with some food for them, but she never came home that night. On June 3rd, 2017, some teenagers walking near the railroad tracks smelled something really putrid. They followed the scent which led them to an abandoned house. Within the bushes lay the body of a woman. It was only 500 feet from where the bodies of Rhonda Jones and Christina Bennett had been found, which was also only 4 blocks from the police station. One of the teens reported to the media that the woman's face was so blackened and bruised that he thought there was a black bag over her head. The female victim was found in the fetal position. Something had been stuffed inside her mouth, and there was a wound to the back of her head. She was naked, with her blouse discovered underneath her body. The body was later identified as Megan Oxendine. Her autopsy was not performed for 16 months after her remains were first located. The coroner stated that she had drugs in her system, but there wasn't enough to have caused a fatal overdose. Her cause of death was listed as undetermined. Megan Oxendine's family has expressed that they believe she knew who had murdered Rhonda and Christina, and she was killed for it. Cynthia Jacobs, a 41-year-old woman, was reportedly with Megan Oxendine the night she was murdered and has since disappeared. Her family has also expressed that they believe she knew too much. On September 5, 2017, Abby Lynn Patterson vanished. She had recently left a post-rehab treatment facility in Charlotte, North Carolina, and was visiting her mother in Lumberton for only 2 days. A brown Buick was seen picking her up around 11:30 a.m. that day. Abby had told her mom that this person, who was never formally identified, was going to take her to visit some old high school friends. This man claims that he dropped Abby off at a different location and that he never saw her after that. However, the man's name and the location have never been revealed. Her mother reported her missing at 6:30 p.m. that same day. Her case was treated drastically different by the media and the police compared to the 3 women who had been murdered. For Abby's picture in the press, for example, they used 3 beautiful photos from social media. For Cynthia and Christina, they used their mugshots. Remember that all 5 of these women had histories of substance abuse. But when this young and pretty white woman Abby went missing, the police, the media, and the FBI handled her case in opposite the manner the other women's were. Abby's family and the FBI have worked really hard to separate her case from the other women, not wanting Abby to be associated with them. Determining what had happened to these 3 murdered women, what were their causes of death, and acknowledging the unimaginable suffering they had endured was not a priority. Based on the degree of advanced decomposition, the coroner claimed that he could not determine an official cause of death for either Rhonda, Kristin, or Megan. However, they did report to be signs of asphyxiation on all 3 victims. Unfortunately, due to the state of decomposition, it could not be concluded. Yet, all of the evidence at the crime scenes clearly show signs of homicide, and the process in which their deaths were handled only leads to alarming signs of negligence and even a possible cover-up. The blanket that Kristin Bennett's body had been wrapped in while she was discovered inside the television cabinet was instructed to be discarded. An officer of the Lumberton Police requested that the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner dispose of this evidence. The medical examiner did as they were told and got rid of the blanket, which likely held pertinent evidence, including possible DNA of the perpetrator. It wouldn't be until 20 months after these women's bodies were found, that the police would submit their rape kits. According to a statement made by the Lumberton police in 2019, they justified these actions by claiming that due to the advanced decomposition of the women's bodies, the sexual assault evidence collection kits would likely not have yielded any helpful results. Other evidence was prioritized and submitted to the crime lab for testing, which they believed could help progress it instead. However, when they were asked by Inside Edition as to why they disposed of the blanket one of the victims was wrapped in, they declined to comment. In 2019, the fingernail clippings of all 3 victims were finally submitted to the crime lab for testing. But as of this recording, they have still not been performed. The Lumberton police continue to investigate the murders of these 3 women as separate incidents, refusing to see the obvious patterns and signs that a serial killer was operating in their town. This view was eventually changed once the FBI became involved, and their investigations have been combined with a joint reward up to $75,000. Yet, they still don't acknowledge them as homicides, but rather suspicious deaths that may be connected. This is ridiculous and completely illogical that they won't categorize these women's deaths as murders. You have 3 women who had scratches and bruises, who were purposely disposed of and then displayed to the open public that they had been killed. One of them had been reportedly so battered and bruised, it looked like she had a black bag over her face. Yet there was no signs of homicide. All 3 women had a history of substance abuse and may or may not have been linked to sex work at one time. And the police and the coroner's officers appeared to correlate their deaths to these reasons, instead of what appears to be obvious to everyone else, that these marginalized women were targeted and murdered. In recent years, Lumberton Police Chief Michael McNeil said in a statement, and I quote, "I think about these women and their families constantly. It weighs on me heavily that this tragedy occurred, and we don't yet know exactly what happened. We are grateful to the community members who have cooperated with these investigations, and we hope more people will come forward with information to help us bring closure to Rhonda, Christina, and Megan's families." Whether his intentions are sincere or not, his words are meaningless. They lack any significance or depth when nothing has changed under his leadership. The community has expressed that there are many women who have reached out to the police for help, fearing they were being targeted, and the officers did nothing about it. According to the Red Justice Project podcast, which is hosted by 2 Lumbee women, Megan's mother reported that her daughter had been assaulted only 2 days after her interview was aired. Megan Oxendine came to her mother terrified after being attacked by 5 men who had ambushed her in the streets, cutting off her hair. This action in itself was very anti-Native. Cutting the long hair of an Indigenous person was a practice that began inside the cruel and ominous settings of the boarding schools they were forced to attend. It was a way for the white people to rip them of their Native heritage and ridicule them. Megan Oxendine claimed that she didn't know who her assailants were, but her mother had a feeling that she did. She contacted the police about the assault on her daughter, but the Lumberton police never called her back. This complete lack of sympathy, care, and inaction by law enforcement illustrates a pattern of judgment, systemic racism, and ineffective policing in the region, which results in a lack of intervention and thus protection of these vulnerable, marginalized women. The absence of integrity shown by the Robeson County Sheriff's Department is not limited to the community's opinion and personal experience. They are well known for their shady criminal past, and from all reports, nothing of significance has changed there. District Attorney Johnson Britt had sometimes observed how some deputies appeared to be living beyond their means. Some of them had lavish homes, fancy cars, motorcycles, boats, and wore designer clothes, but there was no real inclination or obvious evidence of criminal involvement. That changed in 2002 when an informant came forward with allegations made against deputies who he claimed gave him a handgun during a home invasion they had disguised as a sting operation. His suspicions increased further when this particular incident was not on file, and this handgun was later located inside a deputy's private locker. In 2005, the State Bureau of Investigations, along with the U.S. Attorney's Office, investigated the Sheriff's Department. This led to 22 people at the Robeson County Sheriff's Office, including the sheriff at the time, facing and being convicted of criminal charges. What became coined as Operation Tarnished Badge, the officers involved were charged with a wide range of serious crimes. The most serious offenses including firebombing residences, armed robbery, kidnapping, theft, drug trafficking, and money laundering. Their degrees of incompetence and corruption have caused more damage to the community than anyone ever could have believed was possible. In 2016, a man snuck into a woman's home by removing the air conditioner box inside her window. He held her at knife point and raped her. The woman called the police after her brutal attack, and a rape kit was submitted. The state crime lab identified that the man's DNA matched that of Michael Ray McClellan. Based on his 2007 conviction for felony assault with a deadly weapon and first-degree burglary, his DNA was in CODIS. However, due to gross neglect or possible intentional oversight, this pertinent criminal evidence was ignored. Years would pass, and no one followed up with the suspect, and justice for this victim of rape was never found. This vile predator remained free. On November 5, 2018, 13-year-old Hanya Aguilar was waiting outside her parents' home for them to take her to school at Lumberton Junior High. Out of nowhere, a man approached her wearing dark clothing and a yellow bandana. The girl screamed for help, but she was grabbed and pushed into her parents' running green Ford SUV. The man sped out of the mobile home park. Her cousin witnessed the entire thing, but there was nothing they could do to stop it. Even though the authorities were immediately contacted, the little girl had vanished without a trace. FBI accessed surveillance footage, which showed a man matching the description, walking the area of the mobile home park. 3 days later, a green Ford Expedition was discovered about 10 miles away from Hanya's home. The FBI featured the little girl in their most wanted case of the week, and they, along with the governor's office, offered a reward up to $30,000. Hundreds of leads were followed, and hundreds more interviews were conducted, but nothing could lead them to who had kidnapped this little girl. On November 27th, a tragic discovery was made. Approximately 8 miles from where Hanya Aguilar was taken from her home, local police and FBI agents found a body in a swamp, weighed down in about 4 feet of water. The next day, the body was identified as 13-year-old Hanya Aguilar. An autopsy was immediately performed and revealed that she had been raped and had likely died from asphyxiation. On December 18, 2018, a man named Michael Ray McClellan was arrested for kidnapping, rape, and murder. This man was already in police custody for robbery and kidnapping in a carjacking in nearby Fairmont on October 16th, and a warrant had been issued for his arrest. A second warrant was issued on October 17th for reasons related to a violation of his parole, which he had been on since June. However, neither warrant was served until November 13th, 8 days after Hanya had been abducted. If the sheriff's department had served this warrant earlier, McClellan would have already been in jail. What was even more disturbing was how they had already had a DNA match to the suspect, linking him to a sexually violent crime. When the news broke out in the media that the sheriff's office had failed to follow up with the DNA match of the monster who would brutally end the life of a little girl, Robeson County District Attorney Johnson Britt knew he had to take action. An internal investigation ensued, and it was discovered that the rape kit was inside one of the desk drawers of the Major Crimes Office of the Robeson County Sheriff's Department. This DNA match should have led investigators to obtain a new sample from the suspect, McClellan, but since the sheriff's office failed to follow up, that never happened. This vile rapist had remained free for years, and his victim was never given justice. Even worse, this violent sexual offender was allowed to commit the worst imaginable crime, that against an innocent child. Imagine if the sheriff's department of Robeson County had performed their due diligence, if they even understand what that entails. This little girl's life would have been saved, and her family would never have known the pain and loss they have suffered. Two officers, Major Anthony Thompson and Sergeant Darrell McFadder, were determined to be likely the ones at fault for this gross negligence and were placed on immediate suspension. They were found guilty of violation of department policies and procedures. McFadder was terminated, and Thompson opted to resign and retire early. However, Sergeant McFadder has vehemently denied any wrongdoing on his part. He posted on his Facebook page the very next day, and I quote, "I learned about the DNA hit when District Attorney Johnson Britt went public with it, like everyone else. Anyone who knows me would tell you if I had received the DNA hit, the suspect would have been processed and charged." This is interesting and a brave move on his part, because it would not surprise me in the least if he was used as a scapegoat. Someone had to go down for this critical oversight, which led to a child's death. And we all know that sometimes an innocent person takes the blame for someone else who may be considered less disposable. With the extreme level of corruption shown by the sheriff's department over the years, I would not put framing an innocent sergeant for this neglect past them. The internal investigation unearthed that an audit of the state crime lab had more than 15,000 rape kits, which had yet to be tested. This was both evidence of the excessive amounts of sexual violence being committed against women and girls in the state, as well as the lack of priority they are given. Even more alarming was how in 2015, 333 rape kits had been destroyed. As to why and by whom this direction was given was not reported, but this complete lack of concern for justice for sexual predators illustrates how these crimes and their victims are treated. Once this information was released to the public, a major change took place. North Carolina Attorney General Josh Stein announced a $2 million grant to expedite the processing of rape kits to help prevent such a backlog from existing in the future. In 2019, North Carolina passed the Survivor Act, which sets strict rules and parameters for the collection and processing of rape kits. Medical facilities and other agencies must notify law enforcement within 24 hours of collection. This law mandates that law enforcement pick up the rape kit within 7 days and submit it to a crime lab within 45. If they fail to meet these regulations, they will face swift fines and penalties. But for the loved ones of Hanya Aguilar, these changes were put into place far too late. The only thing left to hope for was true justice for the monster who stole this precious little girl's life. On November 22, 2024, Michael Ray McClellan attempted to flee police custody on his way to the court to face his justice. Using a makeshift handcuff key, he tried to break free, but failed. Once inside the courtroom, he would plead guilty to the kidnapping, rape, and first-degree murder of 13-year-old Hanya Aguilar. He further pled guilty to the previous incident of rape that occurred in October 2016, and an additional attack on a woman in July 2018. Although the defendant apologized to the family, it was evident that he held no remorse or regret. Michael Ray McClellan was sentenced to prison for life without the possibility of parole in exchange for his guilty plea, avoiding the death penalty. However, as he was being transported back to prison, he hit the latch on the deputy's gun and successfully pulled it from his holster. There was an altercation between McClellan, the deputy, and the officer driving the vehicle. He slammed on his brakes and was able to grab the gun from the offender's hand as he was pulling it back. They sprayed McClellan with pepper spray, and he stopped resisting. On August 8, 2019, Robeson County Sheriff's Deputy Eric Gavan was arrested on several serious sexual offenses, including felony second-degree forcible rape, felony second-degree sex offense, felony second-degree kidnapping, felony restraint, and felony sex act by a subparent or custodian. The charges resulted from an investigation that had begun in April 2016. He was initially held by the State Bureau of Investigation on a $1.1 million bond. However, on March 27, 2020, he was granted pretrial release with no date set to return to court. At least according to his LinkedIn profile, this man is still employed as a patrolman by the Robeson County Sheriff's Department. Speaking of no real change being made. These women were so much more than individuals who struggled with substance abuse and possibly engaged in sex work. They were sisters, friends, mothers, daughters, and they were not defined by these behaviors. Their struggles did not fully describe them. It is important to the loved ones of Rhonda Jones for others to understand that she was not how the media and law enforcement portrayed her to be. She was a loving and kind mother to 5 beautiful children, the first of which she had at only 14 years old. Rhonda Jones did have some issues with drugs in her past, but she had turned her life around. Maybe she had gotten involved in drug use again at the time of her death, but that doesn't belittle her existence or value. Many people never realized that she was brilliant at mathematics and had earned herself a college degree. A friend of hers, who was also her boss, Beverly Collins Hall, a founder of the nonprofit group American Indian Mothers, spoke about how intelligent, inspiring, and full of empathy Rhonda Jones was. She was one of the first people to participate in their transitional housing program, and she watched Rhonda grow up for over 20 years. Recently, Rhonda returned to the program to help others who were struggling, as she had. She had even created a data tracking system for the recovery program, which is still utilized today. Rhonda's mother and sister are beyond devastated by her murder and are very vocal about how they feel the local police have failed them. they refused to stay quiet and not demand justice for their daughter and sister. Together, they have fueled their pain and anger into the creation of Shatter the Silence, an organization committed to sharing the stories and unearthing the injustice behind the missing and murdered people in Robeson County, North Carolina. Rhonda's mother, Sheila, is devoted to this group, spending up to 60 hours every week spreading the word about their organization, the problems in the county that continue to harm the people, and reaching out to other families of victims of violence. They talk to the people, listen to their voices, share in their heartbreak, and add their loved ones' names to the list. As of 2023, when this article was published, there were 377 names. It has been addressed by some in the community that the Lumbee tribe is not perceived as being native enough, which has created additional obstacles for them. Many of its members are of mixed race, including African American, Hispanic, and white, and this has led some Indigenous people to not feel as included within the Lumbee tribe. Specifically, Indigenous persons who are also Black have experienced historical racism from both Native and non-Native communities. For individuals who don't feel welcome within the Lumbee community, feeling that they are not Indigenous enough to be part of the tribe, if they are experiencing violence, they may not feel supported. There appears to be a strong correlation between violence and a lack of community. Tied in with the inherent racism and cultural insensitivity of much of its law enforcement, this creates an additional obstacle for these victims of violence. This ingrained cultural racism by non-Native officers toward the Indigenous communities has helped to perpetuate the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls two-spirit in the area. The Lumbee community also faces discrimination by other tribes who see them as being descendants of Africans instead of being Indigenous due to the prevalence of mixed-race members. What some academics refer to as anti-Blackness, they experience this from both the non-Native community and other Indigenous communities. This has created a deep division, manifesting itself in a lack of community, sovereignty, and justice. This isolation and segregation between the Lumbee and other Indigenous tribes halts any progressive efforts made to effectively stop the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls two-spirit crisis. In January 2025, President Trump signed into action a memorandum that would begin the process for the Lumbee tribe to be granted federal recognition, which will include full tribal benefits. Once fully federally recognized, they will be included in the federal database as well as be given the resources to establish their own data collection. Hopefully, this newfound federal recognition will bring with it an increase in positive opportunities and a decline in the violence perpetrated against the Lumbee women and girls. The core roots of the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls two-spirit epidemic are found within the violent patriarchy and racist colonial ideology that has been forced upon the Indigenous people. What was once society where women were highly revered and given equal status as community members has been inflicted by violence and marginalization since the start of the colonization of the states. Colonial policies disrupted Indigenous social structures, imposed patriarchal systems of governance, and perpetuated cycles of violence and marginalization. These policies have led to socioeconomic disparities, inadequate access to resources, and a lack of legal protections, exacerbating the vulnerability of Indigenous women and girls. All of these factors have significantly increased the vulnerability of Indigenous women and girls becoming victims of violence. Sexual violence has long been utilized as a tool of colonialism and was used as a method of genocide for hundreds of years. It could be argued that in many respects, it is still being used by these predators against Indigenous women and girls today. Thank you so much for listening to the tragic, infuriating stories about the Lumbee women of Robeson County, North Carolina. If you have any information at all regarding these cases that could help bring some justice for these women and their loved ones, please contact the FBI office of Charlotte. Based on the historical records of the Lumberton Police and the Sheriff County's Department of Robeson, I would strongly advise not contacting them with information. Until next time, stay safe and watch out for shades of murder happening in the streets next door, especially inside your own home. Shades of Murder is created, researched, written, and edited by Alita Caldwell. Original music, Stranger, composed by Stereo Code.